Arsenal are gunning for the Premier League once again. They're back at the thick end of the conversation for the Champions League for the first time in what feels forever. Now is the perfect time to celebrate them. Today we go back to their roots in the munitions factories of South London and to the first great team under the majestic management of Herbert Chapman. This is the creation of Arsenal. The name Dial Square might not mean anything to you, but if you're an Arsenal fan, it should. That was the name of a munitions factory workshop, and it was the moniker that the first Arsenal team played a game of football under. In 1886, a group of munitions factories in the Woolwich area of South London decided to form a football team. After playing the odd 90 minutes under the name Dial Square, finally, Woolwich Arsenal were born. This despite never formally playing a home match in Woolwich. 7 years later, the club became the first of its kind from the capital to be admitted into the Football League and the first south of Birmingham to turn professional. Mere months after being saved from financial peril, Arsenal welcomed Newcastle United in their first ever professional league match in a 2-2 draw at Manor Ground. Whilst the club didn't hold on to many designs of promotion, thanks to the Northern and Midlands heavy makeup of the First Division, manager Harry Bradshaw had established the club in the second tier. Finally, in 1903, it looked as though Woolwich Arsenal would make a break for the top flight. Midway through the campaign, however, Bradshaw would move to Fulham, who occupied a place in the Southern League. Luckily for the Gunners, they had a replacement in waiting when Phil Kelso, an understudy of Bradshaw, seamlessly took the club on a mid-season jaunt into the First Division. Arsenal would see some success in solidifying their position in the top tier whilst making the semi-final of the FA Cup in successive years, losing to Newcastle United in 1906 and the Wednesday in 1907, arguably the two most successful clubs of the decade. With the onset of the 1910s, unfortunately, Woolwich Arsenal began to be disarmed. The Boer War had taken its toll on the club, with significant layoffs at the munitions factories, leaving a dwindling support in the football team. After a brief hiatus, Jack Humble returned to his role as a director of the club and struck up an uneasy alliance with Tory and property developer Henry Norris. For better or worse, he was the man to save the ailing club. Norris's plan was to send the club into voluntary liquidation, in the hope they could bounce back quickly with a reincorporation of a new company and the reissuing of fresh shares. It would have revitalised the club had King Edward VII not died and sent the nation into a period of mourning. Norris had a business partner, William Hall, and together they were already involved with Fulham. Together they decided the best course of action was to merge the two clubs. When the authorities dismissed that on grounds of complete madness, Plan B was for Arsenal to move into Craven Cottage and become Fulham's flatmates. That too was rejected. Regardless, both Norris and Hall took on the club's controlling stake and removed the debt and were able to move forward. 3 years later, a headline in the Kentish Independent read, "Arsenal to move to the other side of London." It would be a mere 10 miles from Plumstead to Highbury, but the consequences were far-reaching. Norris was already controversial enough for his plans to smelt Arsenal into Fulham, but after finding 6 acres of land in Highbury, north of the Thames, he found enemies all over the capital. But the likes of Clapham Orient, Chelsea and Tottenham could not argue, because Arsenal had the Football League on their side and also God. God, since even the Archbishop of Canterbury was involved in drawing up the 21-year lease near the Gillespie Road tube station for Woolwich Arsenal's new stadium. Highbury, as it would be simply known, was ready for the opening day of the 1913-14 season, just about. But the football it would first grace would be the second division game, after the club suffered relegation months prior after winning just 3 matches of 38. Arsenal, though, would be on fire, with a staggering improvement in supporters clicking through the turnstiles and a fight for promotion straight back to the top flight. They were also set on a name change, deleting the Woolwich part on account of them never actually playing in Woolwich, and now they would be called the Arsenal. Unfortunately, a promotion at the first time of asking wasn't attained when goal average split the promoted Bradford Park Avenue and third place Arsenal. Finishing 6 points and 4 places back the subsequent season, however, bizarrely resulted in promotion, and it birthed an intense rivalry. Let me explain. Well, before I do, first off, Arsenal shouldn't have really been in 6th place anyway. It should have been 5th above Birmingham. This wasn't realised until 1975 because of an error calculating goal average. Anyway, because of 2 teams conspiring to fix the result of a match which directly impacted on Chelsea's relegation, the Football League had to act. The 2 teams in each other's pockets, incredibly, were Liverpool and Manchester United, and the result stopped the latter from being relegated. Instead of demoting Manchester United on the grounds of bringing the game into disrepute, the Football League kicked the can of shitstorm to another arena. Chelsea's relegation was expunged, and with no desire to organise a 21-team league, another club was needed. Instead of sending the second tier's third place Barnsley or holding off on Tottenham's relegation, a vote was held between 7 teams to determine the 22nd team in the First Division. The aforementioned were joined by 4th place Wolves, as well as Birmingham and Arsenal, who were initially erroneously ranked 5th and 6th respectively, Hull, who recorded a 7th place finish, and no, not 8th place Huddersfield Town, but Nottingham Forest, who just barely escaped their own fight for the Football League re-election, all the way down in 18th place. Never mind, story for another day. Arsenal won their place in the First Division off the field with 18 votes to Spurs' 10, and Tottenham fans never ever referenced it again. The First World War ensured football was kicked into touch, but when it returned, Arsenal set about re-establishing themselves in the top flight. Leslie Knighton had taken the club on after the war and returned it to mid-table stability from the dugout, but results had waned. They'd flirted with relegation, finishing a point and 2 places above Chelsea in 1924, and only 1 place above the relegated Preston North End a year later. In Athletic News that summer, an advert was placed for Knighton's successor. It read, "Arsenal is open to receive applications for the position of team manager. He must be experienced and possess the highest qualifications for the post, both as to ability and personal character. Gentlemen whose sole ability to build up a good side depends on the payment of heavy and exorbitant transfer fees need not apply." And when they found the man they thought could improve them, they doubled his wages and shipped him down to London. On the outskirts of Sheffield in the haze of 1878, Herbert Chapman was born into the coal-mining community of Kiverton Park. His football career took in the nearby Northern and Midlands teams of Grimsby Town, Northampton Town, Sheffield United and Notts County, before he moved down south to Tottenham Hotspur in 1905. Overall, this was the state of football in the early 20th century. The grip of northern industry that had spawned communities was as ubiquitous as it had been in the 19th century, and therefore the dominant football of the north was loosening. As a whole, the sport was becoming more inclusive to southern teams. For example, there wouldn't be a league winner south of Birmingham until the 1930s, and since the Football League was established in 1888, only Tottenham Hotspur in 1901 had won the FA Cup by the time Herbert Chapman became a football manager. By the time Tottenham Hotspur were a card-carrying member of the Football League, Herbert Chapman had left London for a 3rd stint at Northampton Town. This time, he was promised the manager's job, and so began one of the great managerial careers in football history. His Northampton team claimed the Southern League in 1909 with a brand of counter-attacking football that dazzled non-league. Chapman had come to the realisation that teams could attack for too long. Therefore, the Cobblers ran games on the transition and were at their incisive best, netting a record 90 goals in the 1908-09 campaign. They didn't overstay their welcome in front of goal, their defenders didn't just launch the ball upfield but aimed long passes to the forwards. At Northampton, Chapman found his love of wingers and specifically for them to cut inside, be closer to goal and therefore pose a greater threat. It quickly became obvious that he had outgrown the club. Whilst he was busy taking Northampton to a more international standpoint by leading the Cobblers on European tours, as well as proving his mettle against Newcastle United, the team of his era, in the Charity Shield final and in the FA Cup, there was a very real ceiling. Every season, those at the bottom of the Football League wouldn't get relegated into non-league like today, but they'd be put up for re-election. Chapman found that this system favoured teams such as his former club Spurs, as well as those with greater resources, such as Chelsea. In 1911, he campaigned to scrap the election system, but was found banging his head against a brick wall. A third division in English football was created, helpfully known as the Third Division, but this came in 1920, by which point Chapman had moved on from his next job, an appointment within the Football League at Leeds City. Yes, Leeds City, because this was before Leeds United. Chapman found them in the lower reaches of the Second Division, and by the onset of the First World War, they were promotion contenders. Until they weren't. Disgruntled at an offer below the maximum wage, Charlie Copeland threatened to go to the FA about illicit payments that Leeds City were rewarding their players. In response, Leeds binned him off to Coventry and Copeland retorted with the ultimate comeback. He dobbed the club into the FA, they were expelled from the Second Division and were subsequently wound up. Once Herbert Chapman could prove to the FA that he wasn't at Leeds City when the illegal payments were made, he was free to take up a managerial post in the Football League. When he did so in the new year of 1921, he was manager of Huddersfield Town. Huddersfield, owned by Hilton Crowther, a man who almost merged the club with the nascent Leeds United in the Second Division because of poor attendances at Huddersfield's Leeds Road Stadium. When Chapman found them, Huddersfield were in the middle of their first season in the top flight of English football. After just 6 full campaigns in the Football League, it was a stratospheric rise, but nothing compared to the journey Chapman would take them on. Having acquired Clem Stevenson, Chapman dredged Huddersfield out of the relegation race and almost into the heights of a title race, had the FA Cup not reared its head in January of 1922. Picking off Burnley, Brighton and Blackburn after replays, Huddersfield's focus soon turned to the Cup, and they finished off in the bottom half once again. Stevenson was crucial in netting goals to take Huddersfield beyond Millwall and Notts County, before one of the 2 Billy Smiths in the team scored the only goal of the final against Preston. Huddersfield had their first piece of silverware and Chapman was only just beginning. Whilst they were saddled with the reputation of defensive football, deploying a 3-man defence, Huddersfield rose to unimaginable heights. After a bronze medal in the league in 1923, Chapman steered the club to 2 league championships in succession, equalling the great teams of the time in Sheffield Wednesday, Aston Villa and Preston North End. In 1924, Chapman's Huddersfield had averaged just 1.4 goals per match in winning the league title. That figure only climbed to 1.64 for the subsequent season's retaining of the title. Meanwhile, their record of 28 conceded in the second of Chapman's title triumphs broke a record for the least goals conceded per game in a title-winning season. June 15, 1925 was one of football's most important days. First of all, FIFA felt moved to act upon the suddenly defensive football which had enslaved the game. In changing the offside law so that only 2 opposition players instead of 3 could be between an attacker and the goal, football became frenzied with goals. That same day, Herbert Chapman saw a job advert in Athletic News. Herbert Chapman may well have been the toast of English football and may well have won 2 consecutive championships at Huddersfield Town, but that didn't mean an overabundance of confidence followed him down to North London. Whilst he demanded a doubling of his wages and a 5-year plan from which to work from, he reverted to the 2-3-5 formation which had polluted football and tried to play more attacking football. This during the haze of the unknown after FIFA had dramatically altered the offside rule. This was a tentative Chapman in a feeling out process. It took a 7-0 demolition at the hands of Newcastle United for Chapman to be persuaded to change. One of his players, a sore Charlie Buchan, who was formerly of Sunderland, was deeply hurt by the scoreline and implored Chapman to return to his tactics that had won Huddersfield the league, that being play 3 at the back. That was the first step to a team which would rout their opposition and tot up 127 and 118 goals respectively in title-winning seasons a number of years later. Utilising Charlie Buchan and Jimmy Brain up front, Arsenal returned to the semi-final of the FA Cup for only the 3rd time in Chapman's 2nd season after they had finished behind the treble-winning Huddersfield in 2nd place the prior year. In the newly built Wembley, however, Chapman wouldn't be able to repeat his successes in the competition with Huddersfield, thanks to a sole Hughie Ferguson goal that saw Cardiff, not Arsenal, lift the FA Cup in 1927. Tactically, Chapman retained his inside forwards and used them for his greatest weapon, the transition. They were all but utilised as second strikers, slightly ahead of the metronomic figure in what you'd call a number 10 these days. Arsenal quickly became a machine. And once Herbert Chapman gained complete control over the club, Arsenal could ascend to unforeseen heights. He first won a battle against Chairman Sir Henry Norris when another member of the board, Sir Samuel Hill Wood, took his side. Then Norris was ousted after it was revealed he had siphoned money off to pay players a little bit extra. This still in a time of the maximum wage. After Norris was gone, disgraced, Chapman was free to press on with stadium refurbishments and was left unshackled. He also got his desired assistant manager, Tom Whittaker, after a bust-up with George Hardy when the long-standing coach threatened Chapman's authority on the touchline. The inconsistencies of the team soon bled away as the 5-year plan became a reality after 2 more mid-table finishes. Horace Cope was acquired for fullback from Notts County, Jack Butler was moved into the 3-man defence, David Jack succeeded Charlie Buchan, whilst Alex James was purchased from Preston and Cliff Bastin from Exeter City, and the latter would become the club's top scorer. In signing David Jack from Bolton, Arsenal had broken the British transfer fee record. Chapman's dream of transforming Arsenal into the Newcastle of the South was finished on one front at least. They were spending money. That money now had to win the club some titles. Chapman had rejected the chance to rejoin Huddersfield the previous spring, and after dispatching of Hull City after a semi-final replay, he met his former club in the 1930 FA Cup final. Arsenal would not repeat the fumble of 3 years prior, when Alex James and Jack Lambert combined for the goals either side of the break to deliver Chapman his first trophy at Highbury. Just as the Cup had opened the floodgates up for Chapman in West Yorkshire, it would prove so in North London too. The perpetual goalkeeping problem at the root of Chapman's Arsenal didn't appear to hinder them in the subsequent season. It took until March 7th for a clean sheet to be acquired, at home to Huddersfield no less, but this was an Arsenal scoring goals for fun. Aston Villa and Middlesbrough shipped 5 at Highbury in November. Blackpool and Leicester were hit for 7 either side of Christmas. Derby lost 6 goals on Valentine's Day, whilst Grimsby were the hardest hit in January, conceding 9. It was an unequivocal message that Arsenal were ready to be champions, and after losing just one of their final 19 matches, they were champions by a massive 7 points. Their tally of 66 wouldn't be bettered until Liverpool's 68 points in the 1978-79 season, which remained a record in a world of 2 points for a win. Designs of a first 20th century double were hampered by failing to win their first 4 matches, by losing 3 on the bounce either side of the new year against Sheffield United and West Brom. The final nails in the coffin came across 3 April days where they returned from Roker Park and Anfield empty-handed. The title would be ceded to Everton by 2 points, and they'd have to settle for silver in the Cup too, thanks to injury ruling Alex James out of the squad and a Jack Allen double for Newcastle. They would be the last silver medals of Chapman's career. The prior summer, Chapman had finally got hold of that final piece of his jigsaw when Frank Moss was signed as his number one. The distractions of the stadium renovation, the tube station renaming, and the club potentially buying third-tier Clapham Orient and using them as a feeder club quickly fell away as the season began in earnest. They were riding high in the league once more, hitting 5s, 6s and 7s and 8s, as well as 9s against clubs like Aston Villa, Sunderland, Wolves, Leicester and Sheffield United, losing just 3 times before Christmas. A chance to rest players after a busy Christmas spell came when the Gunners were paired with lowly Walsall in the 3rd round of the Cup. Chapman would rue that mistake as the Saddlers won out 2-0. Little did he know that would be the last FA Cup match he ever managed. Even if the cup hangover would survive losses against Manchester City and Bolton into February, Arsenal quickly picked up the pieces by winning 11 of their last 15 matches to beat Villa to the title by 4 points. Chapman even had time to coach a couple of England matches, for which he remains an unbeaten manager in a caretaker role after a draw against Italy and victory over Switzerland. The football only appeared to get more perfect in the 1933-34 season, when Chapman steered Arsenal to a goals conceded record of under 1 per game as the club led the way midway through the season. Signings had been made for the future, the reserve squad was burgeoning and the clock had just been put into the clock end. Everything was going perfectly. He took in a few matches of football on a scouting mission for a player he liked the look of in the Bury vs Notts County clash in early January, before having a gander at future opposition Sheffield Wednesday against Birmingham City. Factored in a brief pit stop in his hometown of Kiveton Park, Chapman returned to the capital unwell. Ignoring doctors' advice, Chapman went to watch the 3rd team play in a 4-0 victory over Guildford City. By this time it was too late. Pneumonia had set in and there wasn't the available medicine to abate it. On the morning of Arsenal's match with Sheffield Wednesday on January the 6th, 1934, Herbert Chapman passed away in his sleep. In a time of stiff upper lips, the fixture was played and the points were shared in a 1-1 draw. Arsenal wouldn't win for another month, but numbly won their 3rd title in 4 years, ahead of Huddersfield Town of all teams. Upon the death of Herbert Chapman, football simply carried on. Just as Huddersfield Town had completed their feat of winning 3 league titles on the bounce and maintaining their lofty position in the top flight, so did Arsenal. They matched the feat of Chapman's previous club, have forever stayed in the top tier of English football and remain one of the most recognisable football clubs in the world game. And Herbert Chapman remains one of the game's brilliant thinkers. Whilst most teams remain deadlocked to the 2-3-5 formation, he exploited a gap in the sport by moving a player back into defence during his time at Huddersfield. Therefore, when the offside law changed in 1925, he had an incredible head start on his competition when utilising the WM, or 3-2-2-3. Not only an influencer, Chapman was rampantly successful. Teams like the original Invincibles of Preston in the 1880s had tried. Aston Villa in the subsequent decade won 4 titles in 5 years. The Wednesday could only manage 2 in a row in the earlier 20th century, and Liverpool had won 2 titles on the spin under different managers in the 1920s. Nobody had built a team successful enough to win 3 leagues in succession, until Herbert Chapman had done so at Leeds Road. He had done so effectively twice, as it was his Arsenal team that completed 3 on the spin in 1935. This would not be matched until 1984, when Joe Fagan won the 3rd of 3 in a row for Liverpool after Bob Paisley had secured the first 2. In fact, it took until the 21st century for one manager to win 3 titles on the bounce, when Sir Alex Ferguson did so in 2001. Chapman travelled south to create England's first super club, and he succeeded. His legacy remains in place to this day, and of legacies so big, there's often myth that swirls around adjacently. Yes, he built Arsenal from almost the ground up, added white sleeves to their shirts, and renamed the Gillespie Road tube station to match the club's name. Whilst he was a pioneer of the WM system, he wasn't the first to tinker with the tactical setups of the day. And as for the first to suggest wearing shirt numbers and floodlit football matches, he had been beaten to such introductions. Not that he wasn't instrumental in getting such measures established in the sport. Even before his death, Herbert Chapman was immortal. Shortly before he died, his bust was commissioned to be placed into the marble halls of Highbury to ensure that nobody, not those that came after him despite their successors, Bertie Mee, George Graham, Arsene Wenger, could forget about the standards that he and the club had set.